Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? This man has written some of the best stories in comics, especially some of my favorite Spider-Man stories. His stuff will make you feel bipolar, man. You'll laugh, you'll cry, the whole 9 yards, man. Let him know who we got, Mike.
Today we have legendary comic creator JM DeMatteis with us. But before we chat with JM, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right, our next guest is a legend in the comic book industry. His influence has not only impacted the pages of superhero comics, but film and television as well. He is the co-creator of Justice League International, Maxwell Lord, and Creature Commandos. He has also written for animation like Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and Robin, Batman vs. Robin. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stats Land, we bring to you the one and only JM DeMatteis. How you doing, JM?
I am doing fine. How about you guys?
I am doing swell. When Mark told us you were going to be joining us, man, I was really excited because I've been a big fan for you for many, many years. So let's just dive right on in. Okay, so JM, since it's your first time joining us, we'd like to get your comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
It's not a short story. So I'll see if I can telescope it down. You know, I mean, I was always a comic book fan. My goal was not to be a comic book writer. My goal was to be a writer. I happen to love comics. So in terms of comics, you know, I made a number of attempts over the years before I got in the door. The first time I ever tried, I was like 18 and just with no idea what a comic book script was. I wrote up a sample script, and sent it off to Marvel, and got a rather nasty letter back from an associate editor there, who was probably, I assume, was having a bad day. So I don't hold it against him. He went on to actually be a very well-known comic book writer in that era. And, you know, so I dusted that one off and went away. And like a year later, DC had started an apprenticeship program. They were bringing in new writers and new artists, and you were going to actually become an apprentice in the craft of comic books.
Was this around like 1980, around that time?
Oh, way before that. This is like the late 70s.
Okay.
Late 70s. That's how David Michelinie got into the business. He was one of the people that was in that apprenticeship program. I decided, at least they sent a little form explaining how you write a comic book script, so at least this time I knew that much. And I wrote a Justice League script, which is insane because even after all these years, writing a team book is a really, really difficult balance of elements to get. So for me, at whatever it was, 19 years old or 19 years old, to try to write a Justice League script was absolutely insane. But I got some very positive feedback from someone at DC, and it was very, very encouraging. Time goes on. The next thing that happened was I knew a guy who was working in the Marvel production department. And he was selling stuff. I don't know if you guys know what Crazy Magazine was. It was Marvel's version of Mad Magazine. It lasted for a few years. So he said, you should send some stuff into Crazy Magazine. And I said, this is not really my kind of thing, but he encouraged me. So I sent some stuff and I actually sold him something. Got a check with Spider-Man's name on it. It was very exciting, you know. But I was hoping that would get me through the door into the comic book side of Marvel, and it didn't. So time goes by again. I write up some more samples and I just send them in blind. And this is a good lesson for anybody. You know, I always say to be a freelancer, you need a thick skin and a hard head. You got to keep banging your head against the wall. You have to be able to take criticism. You have to deal with all the rejection. And if it's what you really want, what you do is you keep banging your head against that wall until it breaks. So once again, I write up some samples. I send them into DC. And basically whoever got the sample said, you know, Paul Levitz is buying stories for what they used to call the mystery books, things like House of Mystery, Weird War Tales, House of Secrets. And that's where they broke in, at that point in time, that's where they broke in new writers, because these were little stories that were like between 5 and 8 pages. The perfect way to learn the craft. So I'd never even paid any attention to these books. I never saw them, never read them. So I ran out and I bought a bunch of copies of Weird War Tales, House of Mystery, all these things. Wrote up a bunch of ideas, sent them into Paul, and I still, to this day, I have the letter, and I posted it on social media a couple of times over the years, where Paul just eviscerated my story ideas, criticized my typing, rightfully, but within the context of this, first of all, that Paul even took the time to read this stuff was amazing. He didn't have to. And secondly, he said, feel free to submit again. So, and there's the lesson also. Take the criticism, deal with the rejection, and go through any open door you can. Because all I could see in that letter was, feel free to submit again. You know what I mean? He didn't. So sure, he tore me apart, but he said I could try again. So I went through several more rounds of sending in story ideas and getting rejected. And I was living in Brooklyn at the time. DC was in Manhattan. I said, Paul, can I come up to the office and pitch you some ideas? Which he said, sure. So I got to go up to the DC offices. I pitched him some ideas, and one finally landed. And he worked with me on that script, and I went through a couple of drafts, and I still remember the day as if it was yesterday when Paul accepted that script and shook my hand and said, welcome to the business. That was a really, really huge moment for me.
That is fantastic, man. So your persistence got you the gig that you wanted.
Yeah, you have to be persistent. You know, as a freelancer, even though I've been doing it for more than 40 years, doors are constantly slamming in your face. People have to understand that no matter how successful somebody seems, there's always rejection. It's part of the freelance life. It just is. And if you're the kind of person who's going to run away at the first sign of criticism or rejection, you're not going to make it. You know, I always say to people, you know, go crawl under your desk, bang your head against the wall, curse the gods, and get off your ass and write something new. Because that's all. That's our. You know, Harlan Ellison used to say something similar. Like, that's our weapon. We have one weapon in our hands, and we can create new stories. So keep creating, and that's what I do to this day. So this project dies, I better get another one going. You have to do that if you're going to survive out here.
JM, you co-created Maxwell Lord. Since your tenure on Justice League International, Maxwell Lord has been transitioned to a more of a villain role, right? He was part of the
Not
JLI.
in my mind, but yes, I understand that he has been.
Yeah. He was a part of the JLI, and then eventually OMAC Project. You know, years later, he became a villain. Wonder Woman snaps his neck, and then Infinite Crisis happens, and all of that. But when you were creating Maxwell Lord, what kind of character was he, and how do you feel about the evolution since?
He was what you'll find in our Justice League run, which is a guy who might have some moral gray areas, and that was like one of the arcs that we went through, but who at his core is a decent guy and believes in what he's doing and loves the Justice League and loves these people that he's surrounded with. There was one story, I don't remember the details, where I think Max got shot or something, and the last scene is the Martian Manhunter putting, I think, a Justice League signal device into Max's hand in the hospital, something like that. Meaning, you know, we know who you are, Max. We trust you and we love you, and that's our Maxwell Lord. He might go about his methods in sketchy ways, but he means well, and he really cares about these people in the Justice League. So honestly, you know, when they turned him around like that, it was like, I don't know who this guy is, but it ain't Maxwell Lord, you know. But that first, I have to say, that's comics. When you work in a shared universe, even if you create the character, everybody gets to play with those toys. Just as I've changed around other people's characters, and they probably have cursed me, you know, for doing what I did to their characters. It's the price you pay for playing in a shared universe. But I was very happy to see, like just last week, James Gunn was talking about Maxwell Lord in the movies, and he said, basically, our Maxwell Lord is not the villain. Our Maxwell Lord is the guy from Justice League International. So, and Giffen and I used to say, really, what we came to years later when we were writing Justice League 3000 and Justice League 3001, our stories exist in their own universe. So that other Maxwell Lord, that's another universe as far as we're concerned. Our guy is still that same guy, and he's out there somewhere having fun with the Justice League.
And it's funny because Mark and I were talking about you and Keith's Maxwell Lord, and I was like, he was a perfect fit for that group of people, because Booster Gold was kind of, you know, he had, you know, character issues as well, as far as like how his aspirations, and he wanted fame, you know, that's his kind of origin story, but he's at the core of his heart, he's a good guy. Guy Gardner, everybody hates him, right? The Corps hates him, the Justice League hates him, but at the end of the day, you want somebody like Guy on your team.
Right, and Guy, you know, there was more to Guy than just that outer surface that we saw, especially in his relationship with Ice as that book developed.
Okay, so and then we want to talk about the late great Keith Giffen. You probably worked more closely with Keith than anyone. What was it like working with Keith, and what was that dynamic like getting Justice League International going?
Well, there's two questions. Let me start with the second one. You know, getting Justice League going, we just all kind of, at least I stumbled into it backwards. You know, Andy Helfer, who was our editor, and Keith were putting together this new Justice League. And originally Keith was going to write it all himself. He had been, he'd always been a co-plotter. Keith, well, I'll get to that, but Keith was just so creative, brilliantly creative human being, one of the most brilliantly creative people I've ever known. And he had been co-plotting books. He co-plotted The Legion with Paul Levitz, and he just didn't feel like he was ready to script yet. So I had written the final 6 or 7 issues of the Detroit Justice League just before that, and Andy and I had a great relationship. And Andy asked me to come in and dialogue Keith's stuff. And I looked at Keith's first plot. When Keith would write a plot, it wasn't a typewritten plot. He'd draw a little mini comic with layouts and little notes in the corner, the way Kirby used to sometimes do, And I looked at this and I said, you don't need me. This is great. But they no, Keith doesn't have the confidence to do it. And so I kind of went into the gig kind of like, okay, I guess I'll do it like that, And it took I think I even quit at one point early on because I thought you don't need, it was this whole, I didn't feel like they needed me for this. And then all of a sudden I went, I'm really having fun. These guys are great. It's a great book. I'm sticking around. And the next thing I knew, it was 5 years later, and we'd done Justice League and Justice League Europe and Justice League Cordy, and I was writing, Martian Manhunter spin-offs and Mr. Miracle spin-offs and Dr. Fate spin-offs and all these. So it consumed my life for 5 years. But the truth of the matter is, and I've said this many times, but it's true, we didn't realize until 10 years later when we got back together for formerly known as the Justice League, just what the chemistry was that we had, me, Keith, and Kevin McGuire. When we were doing the book, it was a great gig, but it was just another gig, You're a freelancer. Okay, here's the gig. This is your gig right now. When it's over, you move on, you don't think about it. When we got back together for formerly known as the Justice League, we all kind of went, oh, this is good. We really didn't realize it the first time around until we got back together. And, I've worked with Kevin on a number of projects since then. And Keith and I, after he passed away, I went through a list of all the different projects we worked on together, right through to Scooby Apocalypse. It was a lot. And so to answer your first question, like I said, Keith was just a phenomenally creative human being. I always call him the Jack Kirby of my generation of comic book creators. That's the kind of creativity he had. This is a guy who never ran out of ideas. I always use this metaphor. When my son was little, he had this little plastic bubble bear. You'd squeeze the bear's belly, the bear's head would pop up a little bit, and bubbles would come out. And I always say that was Keith. Give him a squeeze, his head will pop up, 100 ideas will come out, and if you don't like those, wait a minute, squeeze his belly again, and 100 other ideas will come out. And, he wasn't attached to them either. That was the great thing. When we worked together, there was no ego involved. A lot of people, if you're working from their plot, they're very precious about it. You must do this and you must do that. That wasn't the way it was with Keith. Keith and Andy both encouraged me to spin those stories and play with it. You can change a lot through the dialogue in a story, through the dialogue, through the captions, through the interior monologues. And they encouraged me to do that. So, sometimes I'm writing a whole other story on top of Keith's plot. And Keith would see what I did, and he'd build on that. And I'd see what Keith did, and I'd build on that. And that's the way it went. And we trusted each other, And the longer we worked together, I always say it became like a psychic mind meld, I would look at Keith's plot, I could look at the page for half a second, knew exactly what he wanted, and I'd go off and just start writing, So it was a fantastic collaboration. Keith was a very unique person. He was the classic curmudgeon with a heart of gold, You'd get on the phone with Keith, and I felt like it was like Abbott and Costello, and I was a straight man, All you have to do is say, hey, Keith, how you doing? I'd get a 20-minute monologue. I'd feed him another straight line. I'd get another 20-minute monologue. And you could have put him on an HBO special, and people would have tuned in to see it because he was really smart, really fast, and really funny. He was a truly, truly wonderful guy.
Jam, I want to go back to what I said a little earlier. You have an incredible range as a writer, ranging from comedy like Justice League International with Keith, Tragedy of Fearful Symmetry, The Astonishment of Moonshadow. Can you share the importance of having range as a storyteller?
Yeah, and I did it. I didn't do it consciously in the beginning. It just happened, But what I've learned over the years is, for me to continue to be interested, I have to do just what you said. I have to work not just different types of stories, but within comics. But I had to work. I've worked in TV. I've written these animated movies. I've written books. It keeps you interested. It keeps you engaged, and you have to keep yourself challenged. One of the things I learned early on also is that 90% of the time, your editor's not going to challenge you. Your editor has like 5 books, 6 books, 10 books they're trying to get out. They want a good professional who's going to get a good story in on time. They're not going to say, now grow beyond what you've done so far. That's the challenge that a writer or an artist has to do for themselves. That's what happened with Moonshadow. You know, I saw that things were changing in the comic book industry. I saw that there were creator-owned things like, you know, what Frank Miller was doing. DC was doing Camelot 3000. They launched the Epic line at Marvel. And I said, I want to do this. And Moonshadow was an idea I'd had in my head for years. But by stepping out of the kind of superhero comic book mindset and writing Moonshadow, I was able to find my voice as a writer and find myself as a writer. And then had I not written Moonshadow, I couldn't have stepped back in and written Kraven's Last Hunt the way I wrote that, because it broadened my perspective of what a comic book could be. So yeah, you have to really challenge yourself, and you have to keep yourself interested. So from Moonshadow on, it was always creator-owned work, mainstream work, back and forth, TV work, write a book, whatever the thing is, you know. Keep yourself challenged, keep yourself engaged. It's really, really important. I think it's one of the reasons why my career has lasted as long as it has. If I had just said, I'm working for Marvel and DC and writing superhero comics, I might have been out of this game a long time ago.
Jam, I do want to hit on this too. You were on a murder spree for a while. You've written some of them. You written some of the most powerful deaths, specifically for Spider-Man characters like Aunt May.
A murder spree. That's very funny.
Harry Osborn, Kraven the Hunter. What are your thoughts on what Marvel does after the fact? Does it matter to you? Does it take away from the deaths?
That's another excellent question. You know, it's the same thing what I said before about working in a shared universe. It's comics, you know, everybody except Uncle Ben basically comes back, and Bruce Wayne's parents aren't ever going to come back, I hope. But, you know, in some parallel universe story, right, I'm sure there's like a Spider-Verse story somewhere where Spider-Man's parents are alive, or Uncle Ben is alive, or, you know, they've done a what if or whatever with Batman and Bruce Wayne's parents. But in general, you know, everybody comes back, even in the mainstream universes. But when you're writing those stories, you can't think about that, you know. And you know, writing the death of Kraven, the death of Aunt May, the death of Harry Osborn, you have to treat those things as if this is it. You can't be thinking in the back of your head, oh, he's going to come back in 6 months, because then you lose the emotion and you lose the power of that moment. So that for me is the key. But somewhere in your head, you also know it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years, it might be 6 months from now, as it happened with Aunt May. They'll bring this character back. You know, and you hope that they bring him back in a good way. I thought they handled the resurrection of Kraven really, really well. The Aunt May thing, But, you know, again, that's just me. I'm sure other people were delighted to see her come back in the way that she did. We all have our opinions, and especially we get attached to these stories. So, you know, I don't claim to see things objectively around these issues, you know, because it's just a story I wrote and I care about. And honestly, you know, if they brought Aunt May back in 5 years or something, I would have said fine. But it happened really fast, and the whole story with it was an actress pretending to be Aunt May. Never quite made a lot of sense to me.
Well, one more thing I want to hit on, my favorite Spider-Man story. Can you talk about the backlash you received from Kraven's Last Hunt, the original Death of Kraven the Hunter?
Yeah, well, you know, it wasn't like massive backlash, because the book was really, really well received at the time. It's just that if you're talking about what led to Soul of the Hunter, is that what you're talking about? Yes. So at this point, Tom DeFalco, old and good buddy of mine, was editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, and he got a letter from a suicide prevention group, and they were really up in arms because they thought that Kraven's Last Hunt glorified suicide. I don't think that's there in the story. That certainly wasn't my intention, and what was very clear within the context of the story is that Kraven had mental illness issues. His mother had mental illness issues, died in a mental institution of suicide, and that was really the dysfunction, the circle of dysfunction and mental illness in his life. But it really disturbed me that anyone could think that way and think that about that story, so I went home and I pondered it, and that's where I came up for the story of Soul of the Hunter, where Peter has to deal, you know, Peter being Peter, who his primal state is guilt, you know? And I'm thinking, well, you know, even though he wasn't even there at the moment, there's got to be a part of Peter that's always going to go, could I have done something that would have prevented that suicide? And so that started us on this sort of journey that, depending on how you read the story, was either psychological or literal, where he encounters Kraven's ghost and has to set him free of the trap that a suicide soul gets into, you know?
Beautiful.
And I'm happy that they just put out the Spectacular Spider-Man Omnibus like a week ago, and Solo the Hunter is the first story in there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
JM, you've written the only crossovers between Batman and Spider-Man back in 95 and 97.
Two of them, yeah.
95 and 97. Did working on a Marvel DC crossover back then have any significance to you, especially working on Batman Spider-Man crossover?
Yeah, here's the thing. When you work with these characters, the thing that keeps you going also is that for me anyway, and I'm sure for most people that work in this business, there's like a 10-year-old in my soul that, still sees these characters with the eyes of a kid. So if someone calls you up and says, hey, we're doing a Spider-Man Batman crossover, I'm very professional on the phone. That would be interesting, yeah. But inside, there's a 10-year-old who's losing his mind, because Batman and Spider-Man together, I can't believe it, So, but what's interesting to me, I had a great time working on both of those. I think Mark Bagley drew the first one, and Graham Nolan did the second one. And I'm very proud of the fact that I wrote them both, and I think I'm the only one that's ever written an official Batman Spider-Man crossover. I'm sure they'll be doing more now that they're back doing those again. But I'm amazed by it even more. When you're in it. You're thinking about the story and the characters. And now looking back, it's more amazing to me now than it was when I was writing them that I got to do that. And I'm very, very grateful and very, very proud of those stories.
Jam, you're the foremost expert on Dr. Fate. You've done probably the most issues that anyone's ever done. Can you share with us your experiences on your Dr. Fate run, and why do you think Dr. Fate is underutilized today?
That's an interesting question too. Same thing with the Spectacular. I've been waiting years for that Spectacular. I'm pointing there because it's on the shelf behind me. I've been waiting years for them to collect Spectacular Spider-Man. I've been waiting years for them to collect my Dr. Fate run, which I did I did a 4-issue miniseries that Keith drew, and then I did 2 years with Sean McManus, and they just put that out back in May, after waiting since like 1992 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The great thing about working on that book was, and that's the great thing about working in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a lot of freedom. I basically created a whole new Dr. Fate. It wasn't the Kent Nelson. It was a whole new Dr. Fate. It was a whole new dynamic. And I was given freedom on that book the same way I would have had freedom on a creator-owned book. I completely reshaped the book. And it's one of those stories where I got to kind of pour in everything I was thinking and feeling at the time. So I think one of the reasons why at the time some people kind of looked at the book askew was that it was sort of a superhero book, but it was also like a supernatural book, mystical book. It was very, very philosophical, but there was a lot of dumb JLI humor in it also. It had all these different things because that's all of who I am and what I was thinking and feeling at the time. And that's why it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. And I love the supernatural characters, the mystical characters, because it allows you to kind of veer off into sort of a deeper, more philosophical realm where you really get to explore the kind of primal questions of creation. And who are we and why are we here, and other dimensions and our souls and our spirits and all those things. So I love those characters. Why Dr. Fate hasn't been more utilized, I don't know. Doctor Strange has certainly had a healthy career at Marvel.
Exactly.
And Dr. Fate is every bit as good a character as Doctor Strange. So I don't know why he hasn't been utilized. I really don't. He floats around the edges, but he hasn't been the star for a while, and he really should be.
Great point. You've been a part of some popular animation projects like Justice League Unlimited, Young Justice, Batman Brave and the Bold, and one of my favorites, Superman Red Son. How do you prepare to write scripts for animation as opposed to writing scripts for comics?
One little correction, I did not write for Young Justice. They used some of my characters in Young Justice.
Okay.
But I never wrote for Young Justice. Yeah, I've been working in the animation field for, since the early 2000s. And actually sold my first animation script back in the 80s to the real Ghostbusters show.
I remember.
Which the story editor on that show was J. Michael Straczynski. There's a little bit of comic book trivia for you.
Wow, really?
I've loved the animation thing. And another lesson talking about the people that want to have a career in this. It was never on my list of things I wanted to do. I want to write for animation. Never. I certainly want to write comics, want to write film, I wanted to write TV, I wanted to write books, But animation didn't interest me. But the door opened, an opportunity opened. I had worked with an amazing writer named Stan Berkowitz on the live-action Superboy TV show.
Yeah, super legend in the animation world. I know Stan Berkowitz.
Yeah, well, Stan was the producer of the live-action Superboy show, and I wrote a bunch of scripts for that and worked on staff for a short time. And then Stan made the transition into animation and invited me to work on Justice League Unlimited. And what I say to the people out there listening, again, always say yes. Say yes. When a door opens, don't think, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. It's an opportunity. Walk through the door, see what it is. You can change your mind later. So I write a script for Justice League Unlimited, which the first one I did was for The Man Who Has Everything, the Alan Moore story.
Yeah.
And that led to the next, which led to the next, which suddenly it becomes a whole other stream in my career. And the same thing as a freelancer, it's like, oh, the comic book work is slowing down, but I have this animation work over here. Oh, animation's slowing down. I got the comic book work over here. But I've loved working in animation. But the real difference is, let's take a TV show like Justice League Unlimited, or right now I'm writing for a Batman Crusader, the Amazon show.
Oh, awesome.
So they have their staff. They have a season that they've worked out. They have stories that they want to tell. I'm a freelancer. Now I'm not even in LA. I'm living 3,000 miles away. So they come to me and this is the episode we want to do, and they give me the basic beats of the episode. And then I take that and I develop that into a full out outline. And then we go back and say, with TV, there's always notes. There's always executives up the food chain, that have to give you notes on this and that and the other thing. And sometimes the notes are phenomenal and sometimes they're not. And part of being a professional is taking notes that aren't phenomenal and making them work, But I've been lucky because I'd say 99 and 9/10% of the folks I've worked with in animation have been really, really great people. Like the guys at Warner Brothers, they're writers, the guys like Jim Krieg and Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett and Stan Berkowitz. I worked with Dwayne McDuffie. These guys are great writers and on their own. So to work with them and get on the phone and talk story for 90 minutes as we put the story together was a joy. Because I'm used to working pretty much on my own. When I'm working on a script here in my office, it's just me. I like to say me and my imaginary friends, and that's it. So to interact with these guys, what I have to do, I always say, is take off my, if I'm working on a comic, it's my vision of what this story is going to be. Even if it's Spider-Man, it's just me and the editor, and the artist. It's a small little group, and you really get to put a personal stamp on these stories. But with TV, I have to take off that hat and put on my collaborator hat, because I know they have certain things, as I said, that they want me to accomplish in this script. So my job, and it's a fine balance, is to give them what they want, but also bring something fresh to the table. Because if all I'm doing is giving them back what they told me, I might as well be a stenographer.
Right.
That's not the job. Is to take that and bring it to life, and bring something of myself and put new colors and nuances into that story and bring it to another level. And like I said, I've had a great time working in animation.
Well, I gotta just highlight one episode that from Justice League Unlimited that you've written, The Return. The one where Amazo comes back. And my theory, now that you're breaking down kind of the collaborative process, working with, the team, right. On the show, at the end of it all, well, there was one sequence that I like where Lex Luthor was on the run, and then he goes into this barbershop, and he sits down, then he goes down to shoot, right. And next thing you know, he's escaping. He's in this whole underground lair, right, beneath Metropolis. And then once he gets out, the atom pops out on his shoulder. Right. And then they both solve the problem together. Now, how much of that sequence was you versus them saying like, hey, we want Lex Luthor to have this elaborate, escape route?
It's been so long, I don't remember. I'm sure. Imagine, the basic beats probably came from then, because on Justice League Unlimited, in fact, someone else would work on the story. So I would get an outline, maybe a 3-page outline from Dwayne McDuffie, which I would develop into a much more detailed outline and then into a screenplay. So the basic beats were there. It was kind of like what it was working with Keith. My thing was to flesh that out, to flesh out the characters, to give that life. So I'm sure the basic beats of what you described were in that story, but I built on that. So imagine that as a foundation, and I'm putting the building on top of that.
Got it. Okay, you're also the co-creator of Creature Commandos, which is one of my favorite shows right now. The robot episode. Everyone needs to watch that robot episode. Just if you watch that robot episode, you will be a fan. I love that. I love that show. Okay, what is it like seeing things you created for comics on other mediums?
Yeah, the one Creature Commandos is a really interesting case in point, because that's an idea I came up with about 6 months after I just got in the business. I was writing for Weird War Tales. I was pitching ideas to Paul Levitz, and you're sitting there, gotta sell the next story. Well, it's called Weird War Tales, so if you know, the original idea was classic monsters fighting World War II. That was the Creature Commandos. So I was amazed that no one else had ever thought of it. So I was all ready to pitch it to Paul. And then the infamous DC implosion happened, if you know about that.
No.
Do you not know the DC implosion?
No.
Yeah, in this must have been 1977. So I've been working, I sold my first script, maybe 78, I'm sorry. I sold my first script to Paul in December of 1977. They launched all these new titles, all this stuff, and then apparently for a lot of economic reasons, not the least of which there was a horrible winter, distribution got screwed up, a whole lot of reasons. They canceled, 2/3 of their titles.
Yeah.
The line was decimated. There was a period where people didn't know if DC was going to make it out alive at that point. And so the first people to go are the last people in the door. So I was brand new, and I remember Paul, sitting me down and saying, "There's not going to be any work for you for a long time." So I had this idea for Creature Commandos, but I had no place to put it. But time went by, and 8 or 9 months went by, and the doors opened again, and soon I started working with Len Wein, one of the great editors and great people in the history of this business.
Absolutely.
And we had a great chemistry. He became a real mentor and friend to me, and he wanted to do an ongoing series in Weird War Tales, and I remembered that idea from the year before, and I pitched him Creature Commandos. I think he may have come up with the name after I pitched him the ideas. Or we came up with the name together. I don't really remember. And then we were off. But it's early in my career. It's something I wrote, the first batch of stories for, and then I'm not thinking about Creature Commandos anymore after that. You know what I mean? It's a footnote to a footnote. So you jump ahead decades later, and suddenly I hear that they're doing a Creature Commandos TV show. Now, it's not the same characters, but it's the premise. It's the same premise and the same title. And, I have to laugh in a really nice way, not like, you know what I mean? It's just like, who would ever thought in a million years that this thing that I did at the very beginning of my career would be the foundation for this new, not just for this series, but for the DC universe at the moment, It's very cool. Very cool. I love it.
It seems James Gunn likes a lot of your stuff. But
he seems to be a big JLI fan, yeah.
Jim, I want to talk about this. In one way or another, your work has impacted the comic industry for over 40 years. Is there anything about how you were taught to make comics that's lost today?
I can't be objective enough, and it'd be arrogant of me to say, oh, this has been lost, or these guys aren't doing it right, or styles change. Styles change. The tone changes a little bit. But the fundamentals of story remain the same, I think in the era that I came up, if you look at those comics, from like the 70s, well, I was really, when I really broke in, it was really the 80s by the time I got a career going. The 80s, 90s, those comics were packed with story, maybe sometimes too much story. Then you went through the decompression thing where suddenly what we used to put in one issue happened in 6 issues, But the basic bones of what a good story is, the arc of a good character going from point A to point B to point C, wanting your audience to feel something, see these characters grow and evolve, have emotional impact. Whether you're working in comics 30 years ago or now, whether you're writing for TV, writing a novel, the fundamentals of story have to remain the same. So the outer husk. Like there was a period, remember the period where, used to be everybody had thought balloons and all of a sudden you couldn't have thought balloons. Oh no, that's terrible. So that kind of stuff changes, but that doesn't affect what a story is. The fundamentals of story have to be the same. And I think they have remained. And any writer right now working in comics who's successful is not successful because of the style they're layering on top, which is important, don't get me wrong, but they're successful because they know how to tell a good story that's going to engage you and engage your emotions. And I think that's the most important thing. I want you to feel something. I want you to think. I want you to really be engaged with these characters. I've never been a fan of, there's a certain kind of mystery novel that's all plot. The characters sort of just move through it. But certain people like puzzle stories and they want to figure out the plot. That's not me. I never liked plot for plot's sake. I would much rather have a story where there's a thinner plot and I'm really engaged with those characters.
Jim, we're on our very last question.
Okay.
Is there something that we haven't talked about? Do you want to share anything about Spider-Man 94? Do you have any convention appearances? Do you have any projects coming up?
I'll tell you.
Do you want to talk about Brooklyn Dream?
Right. One of the great things this year, you mentioned Brooklyn Dreams, is that all these books are being, all these collected editions are coming out. So we've had Dr. Fate, Spectacular Spider-Man, a new edition of Moonshadow. Brooklyn Dreams is coming up in October. They're collecting, there's a Scooby Apocalypse omnibus. They're collecting A Hero Squared, which is the only creator-owned book I ever did with Keith Giffen. One of my favorite things I've ever done. So that's great. We got Spider-Man 94, just came out this week. The response has been phenomenal. I think I knew they were fans of that show, but boy, are they fans of that show.
I'm a fan of that show, yeah.
I mean, like really serious, hardcore fans of that show, and they seem to be supporting and appreciating the book, so that's a lot of fun. I've been working the past couple of years on this Kickstarter thing called the DeMatteis, where I launched five new series simultaneously with 5 different artists. We've done, excuse me, my allergies are acting up today. We've done 2 rounds. We've done the first 2 issues so far. We'll be going ahead hopefully soon with the 3rd issues. But that's been a great thing to unleash 5 new books on the world at the same time. Creator-owned books with artists that I really, really love working with. What else? Working on animation, writing for Cape Crusader. I've also gone back the first few years to prose. I've written 2 novellas, which you can find on Amazon. One called The Excavator, one called The Witness. And I have a new book that'll be out hopefully end of the year, beginning of next year, called Dark Future. It's sort of a metaphysical science fiction time travel story. And that's just some of the stuff that's bubbling around right now. So keeping busy. Always have to keep busy in a lot of different arenas to keep it interesting.
Any appearances?
Oh, yeah, good question. I'm sorry. There was just we've got a thunderstorm. There was just a big boom of thunder out there. I should do that. Whenever I have something to say, I should end with a boom of thunder. That'd be very dramatic. Appearances. I just went to San Diego Comic-Con. I haven't been at a convention since 2019, since before COVID.
Oh, wow.
So that was a trip. And I hadn't been to San Diego in like 20 years. So that was really something to go back there after all that time. And I figured if I can get through this, I can start going back to conventions, because San Diego is a trip. Had a great time. I'm going to be at a GalaxyCon in St. Louis in October. Then my wife and I are going to Brazil for CCXP in December, which they tell me is about 3 times the size of San Diego.
Really?
So that should be a trip. And if I get through all 3 of these conventions without having a nervous breakdown, I will be doing more conventions next year. Hopefully, at least 3 or 4 next year.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Yeah. JM, this was a wonderful, insightful interview. Thank you for joining us. Just know you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station.
Well, thank you. Feel free to invite me back anytime.
No problem. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and JM DeMatteis. We are out. Peace.
Sig Slayers.